Our church has been doing this Bible reading program, this plan, and this morning I found myself in Matthew chapter 8, trying to keep up and just be faithful in that. And there's an encouraging word in Matthew 8, and we're not going to go through the whole chapter, but these beginning verses, and there's this idea of authority and prayer that I want to connect, that hopefully would be an encouragement and a challenge to us. Now, Matthew chapter 8 comes right after Matthew chapter 7. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus finishes his Sermon on the Mount. And here's the response after Jesus finishes his sermon, chapter 7, verse 28. We read, "When Jesus finished these sayings, this sermon, the crowds were astonished at his teaching." Well, why were they astonished? Verse 29. Because he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as the scribes. So this authoritative teaching was coming from Jesus, and they're astonished at his authority. Chapter 8. Two examples of authority and faith and prayer that I want to connect. The first is with a leper. Chapter 8, we read, "When he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, 'Lord, if you will, you can make me clean.' Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, 'I will be clean.'" So right off the heels of this authoritative teaching, people are astonished. Wow, Jesus is a man with authority. He speaks as someone who has authority from God. Well, he is God. And this leper, he says, okay, if Jesus is authoritative, well, I think his authority goes beyond simply a sermon. I think he has authority over sickness, over circumstance. So this leper comes to him by faith, and he asks. And the underlying presupposition here is, the leper believed that Jesus had authority and ability to do something. And Jesus' response is, "I will be clean." Jesus is a willing Savior. He has authority, but it's not an authority that restricts us from access. So the leper by faith comes to Jesus. "Jesus, you have authority, so I'm going to ask." Now, I don't think many of us are struggling with leprosy. I hope not. But it is a strange season where many are struggling with sickness, with a virus. Many people are struggling with secret sin, with circumstance, with loneliness, with finances. And if we really believe that Jesus is authoritative in his teaching, authoritative in his ability to heal, into comfort, authoritative over all this world, then we'll ask, we'll pray. He's a willing Savior. So like this leper, we should ask. Well, the second example is not just the cleansing of a leper, but the healing of a servant. So a centurion, starting in verse 5 of chapter 8, a centurion comes to him and says, "Lord, my servant is paralyzed. Can you help?" And Jesus says to him, I will come. I'm a willing Savior. I will come and heal him. And the centurion replies in verse 8, "Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word and my servant will be healed. Because I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me." And this centurion would tell soldiers to come, and they would come, and go, and they would go. And he says, "Jesus, I recognize you are someone with authority. And I believe you are a willing Savior. So I'm just going to ask, Lord, will you heal my servant? Will you help me in my need?" And when Jesus heard that the centurion really understood and was respectful and eager about the authority of Jesus. Jesus says in verse 10, "When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, 'Truly, I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such a faith.'" My friends, Matthew chapter 8 was put here for you and I to look at the cleansing of a leper, the faith of a centurion, the healing of a servant who's paralyzed at home. And God, by his Spirit, wants us to connect the authority of Jesus and his willingness to act on those who ask. So the challenge for me and the challenge for you and hopefully the encouragement is we have a willing Savior. So ask, pray, cry out to him. And on the table might not be leprosy. There might not be someone paralyzed who's suffering terribly. But we do have things we need help with. I hope Matthew 8 encourages you to be a person who asks a willing Savior. And we don't ask amiss, because he's not only willing, he's authoritative, and he has the ability to act.